Okay, well, welcome everybody for the books of Nahum, Zephaniah, and Habakkuk this evening, or Habakkuk, depending on how you want to pronounce it. These three, if you look at the kind of the chart here, you can see them up here. They come they're in the period of Judah. So these three come after Israel has been taken off into exile. So we remember from Kings and Chronicles that Israel fell first to the Assyrians in 722. You can see that at the very bottom there, the fall of Damascus in 732, and then the fall of Samaria in 722. So the Assyrians came in, they took the northern kingdom, because you remember there were no good kings in the north when they split from Solomon, Jeroboam and Rehoboam. And then in the southern kingdom, in Judah, we had a few good kings, and so they lasted till 586. So these three prophets were around in Judah, and they were speaking in between those two times. So the northern kingdom of Samaria is all fallen, but Judah is still surviving and hanging on there, and these three prophets are speaking at that time. So we'll do Nahum, then we'll do Zephaniah, and then we'll do Habakkuk because that's the kind of the timeline. So Nahum was the sort of first one to speak out of those three. So that's kind of what's going on around them. Assyria is still strong at the time, and you know they're still hanging in there in Judah, in Jerusalem, and so on. So let's look at the book of Nahum. Well, first of all, as I just said, the three of them are all in that time period before the fall of Judah in 586. So they all come from 722 to 586 in that time period there. So it's a time of real upheaval. It's a time of fear where you've got this massive Assyrian army that have come and swept through. And Judah survived. Israel, the northern kingdom, hasn't. And so it's a time of real challenge and difficulty and upheaval in the world around, and so on. So the three different books, just a quick overview, and then we'll have a quick look through each one because they're not very long. But these three prophets were writing. First, Nahum, he predicts the actual fall of Nineveh, which and the whole book is about the fall of Nineveh, which was the capital for the Assyrians. So he's writing and looking into the future, and God shows him in the future that the capital or the Assyrian people will be taken out by the Babylonians. And he predicts that that's going to happen, even though they're still, you know, strong and still the world superpower at the time, and so on. Zephaniah then comes next. That's written during the reign of King Josiah in Judah, where there is, we remember, we'll look at it in a little bit more detail, but during King Josiah's reign, you remember he found the law as a young boy as he ascended to the throne. They found the law in the temple and he read it and tried to reform Judah and get them back serving God again. And Zephaniah writes during that time of transformation and revival, in a sense, in Judah. And then Habakkuk, he writes towards the end. So Josiah's died, and then there's this massive decline before the Babylonians come in and destroy Jerusalem. But before that, Habakkuk writes his prophecies then. So they kind of go one to the next in a timeline. So let's look at the book of Nahum first. It's only three chapters long, so nice and short. And the key verses really are chapter 1, verse 3 and chapter 1, verse 7. And these kind of give you the two kind of conflicting or the two balancing kind of things that he talks about. First, in verse 3, it says, The Lord is slow to anger, but great in power. The Lord will not leave the guilty unpunished. Nahum, when he writes this, it's actually words that come from, it's the same warning that comes to the people of Israel in Exodus 34, verses 6 and 7. If you remember back where you know, when Moses went up and got the Ten Commandments, and at the bottom they built this golden calf, and they all start bowing down to the calf, and Moses comes down with his Ten Commandments and then breaks them all and so on because he's so irritated. And these are the words that the Lord gives him, that the Lord is slow to anger, great in power, but he won't leave the guilty unpunished. And so, as they were applied back in Exodus to Israel, so now they are being applied by Nahum into Nineveh and into the Assyrians. But the contrast to that is that the Lord is good and a refuge in times of trouble, and he cares for those who trust in him. So even though the Lord, and it's kind of these two polarities, if you like, that the Lord is going to punish the guilty and judge the guilty, but he also is a refuge at the same time for those who are caring and trusting in him. And in many ways, those two verses kind of play out in all three of these prophets, and you'll see them as we go along, that all of them kind of have that same kind of tension between the judgment of God, but also the care and the love of God as well. So in chapter one, the interesting thing about chapter one is that he doesn't actually, in the Hebrew, it doesn't actually mention Nineveh at all. And I think he does that for a very good reason. He does it because he wants us to understand that the prophecy that he has against Nineveh, and it's kind of obvious who he's writing about because of chapter two and so on when he describes the fall of Nineveh. Um, but he really wants to use it as an example for all the superpowers, if you like, that come up, and then God will judge them, and then they fall away because they have their own downfall and so on. And so Nahum here is using this as an example, and he's doing it in kind of prophetic form in his prophecies. But he's saying that every single nation that will come, so it'll be true for the Assyrians, but it'll also be true for the Babylonians. It's true for the Romans. It's probably true, you know, maybe for some of our nations today, even that they'll come up, but God is still there judging. And if they act inappropriately and if they use their power inappropriately and rely on their own strength, then there will be a judgment, and then there will be a downfall that will come. And that's what Nahum really is. So it reminds us that God is watching the attitudes of everyone. He's not just watching the people of Israel. He's watching everybody around and judging all the attitudes, and he's judging the hearts of the people, and looks to see whether they use their power and their influence in a positive way, in a godly way, or whether they're using it for their own devices. And if they're particularly if they're trusting in their own strength, or if they're trusting in God and in what God can do. And ultimately, he will bring down the proud, and he will care for all the faithful. And that's kind of, in a sense, an overview of what Nahum is trying to describe as he kind of pictures Nineveh falling, and Nineveh, the Babylonians coming in and showing and seeing their downfall. He uses some curses that they actually have even sown their own destruction in the seeds of their empire because of their pride and so on, and that God is watching over all of it and sees all of it, and it's not hidden from God, and God is concerned about everybody. The book of Zephaniah kind of picks up, in a sense, a similar thing. In Zephaniah, this is during the reign of King Josiah that we've read about in 2 Kings 22 and 23, probably written around 621. So if you think that the people of Judah went into exile in 586, so you're looking at what, 40, 35 years before they go into exile. But King Josiah, if you remember, he sought reform. He found the law in the temple as they were cleaning it out. He started to read it, and he started to try and introduce transformation and revival amongst the people of Judah. He realized how far the people had fallen from what they should be doing. But really, by then, the people's hearts were so entrenched in their ways of worshiping other gods that even though they kind of went some way towards reform, they didn't really own the reform. It was just imposed upon them by King Josiah. And so as soon as King Josiah died, then it spiraled straight down out of control again into chaos. But there was this kind of little blip, if you like, during his life where things seemed to be going better in the right direction. And Zephaniah, he writes these collections of poetry and of prophecy, and he's looking not at the Assyrian nation in particular, but he's looking at Jerusalem and the judgment that's coming on Jerusalem. So he's writing while these reforms are happening, but he's looking into the future and he sees that actually, even though things may be looking up now, actually in the future things are going to get worse, and there will be this judgment on Jerusalem and on the nations around. But this won't be the end of the story. There is hope for the future. And so the first section is all about the judgment of Jerusalem, and it's actually really kind of graphic language. It almost is sort of undoing Genesis chapter 1, where God is creating. I mean, he starts in chapter 1, verse 2. He says, I will sweep away everything from the face of the earth. I will sweep away both men and animals. I will sweep away the birds of the air and the fish of the sea. So you can see it kind of like undoing everything that God created in Genesis. Is really kind of graphic. The wicked will have only heaps of rubble when I cut off man from the face of the earth, declares the Lord, and so on. And it's just such graphic language about how God's going to destroy everything because of the sin of the people. And chapter 1 kind of at the end in beginning of chapter 2, it culminates in this great army, and it doesn't say who, but this army is going to come and take out Jerusalem, and everything will be destroyed, and that God is bringing his judgment, and that nothing can stand in the way, and God is using this other massive army to come and bring this judgment on Jerusalem because of their sin and because of them turning their back on God. So it's all quite depressing in many ways. But it concludes at the end of this section in chapter 2 with a note of hope, at least. It says this in verse 3, chapter 2, verse 3: Seek the Lord, all you humble of the land, you who do what he commands. Seek righteousness, seek humility. Perhaps you will be sheltered on the day of the Lord's anger. So it's not really a massive promise. It's kind of like a perhaps if you do the right thing, maybe God's going to relent a little bit on you. No guarantees here, guys, but you never know. So maybe it's worth considering. The second section talks wider then about the judgment of the nations, and God pronounces judgment on the Philistines and the Moabites and the Ammonites. Those are the kingdoms around Judah. Philistine, where Gaza is, to the west, and Moab and Ammon to the east and the southeast and so on, and also to Assyria, who were the nation that came in and took the northern kingdom. But also to Jerusalem again. And the judgment that they generally pronounce on these other nations is that they're kind of gloating over the demise of God's people. They're kind of like going, well, look at Israel. Israel's been carted off by the Assyrians. They got what was coming to them. Isn't it good? And they're really kind of gloating. And God's saying, look, I'm looking at you. Don't think this is a cause for celebration, because I am judging and I am disciplining my people. I will discipline you as well, because you are kind of proud in and of yourself and gloating over what I'm doing to my own people. So you don't get away with it either. But he also, at the end of this section, also again puts judgment back on Jerusalem and says, you guys, you're not doing what you should be doing, and you've gone so far away from me, just like the northern kingdom. If you hadn't learned from Israel being carted off into exile, then what do I need to do to make you learn the lessons that you should be learning? But right at the end of that section, it says these words: "Wait, therefore wait for me, declares the Lord, for the day I will stand up to testify. I have decided to assemble the nations, to gather the kingdoms, and to pour out my wrath on them, all my fierce anger." So that's like pictured in Moab and Ammon and all these other Philistia and so on, all these other nations around in Assyria. The whole world will be consumed by the fire of my jealous anger. But then here comes the note of hope. Then I will purify the lips of the people, that all of them may call on the name of the Lord and serve him shoulder to shoulder. So even though there's this judgment, it's almost like it reminds us of the picture of Isaiah, doesn't it? Where when do you remember Isaiah's commissioning? And he says, "Woe is me, I'm a man of unclean lips." And they took the coal out of the fire and they touched him on the tongue and said, "Hey, your sin's now been taken away." And it's like God is saying, "I'm doing this to try and purify the people. I'm not doing it just because it's like a law court and you're found guilty, which is true, but it's not the purpose to kind of discipline you because I'm fed up with you. Actually, I'm doing this because I want a future with you. I need to do something to purify you and to help you to understand." And notice how it also goes back to Genesis 12 and the Abrahamic covenant, where all people on earth will be blessed, right? All of them. Then I will purify the lips of the peoples, and all of them may call on the name of the Lord and serve him shoulder to shoulder. So this is all the kingdoms he's going to gather. And it's that picture of Genesis 12 of Abraham, God blessing Abraham so that he may be a blessing and his descendants a blessing to all of us on this world. And here we see it in Zephaniah coming back again, and that thread being woven through the scriptures. And so judgment is used to purify the nations and the people. It's not a punishment, but it's like, as I said, like Isaiah and that burning coal. And then the last section is a hope for the future in 3:9 to 20. And it describes how God wants to transform all the people into this collective worship together, which we've just read, and it carries on in verse 10 of the same in the same vein. It says, "From beyond the rivers of Cush, my worshippers, my scattered people will bring me offerings." And so on. So it's about everybody coming together, and this is the picture we see of the new heaven and the new earth, ultimately in Revelation, where every tribe and nation and language and everything come together to worship God. Every knee will bow, every tongue will confess. And it concludes with that picture of the future city of Jerusalem, full of God's presence. And there's two beautiful verses here in Zephaniah 3, verse 14, which describes how we will sing to God. "Sing, O daughter of Zion, shout aloud, O Israel." That's what Jeff got you to do the other week, wasn't it? He said, "Be glad and rejoice with all your heart, O daughter of Jerusalem." Right? The Lord has taken away your punishment and turned back and has turned back your enemy, and so on. So it's about us singing praises and rejoicing in God. But then there's this beautiful refrain from God in verse 17: "The Lord your God is with you. He is mighty to save. He will take great delight in you. He will quiet you with his love, and he will rejoice over you with singing." So just as we are singing praises to God, so God is singing praises back to us in a sense. And there's this beautiful picture of worship going backwards and forwards between us and God singing a response, if you like, over us at the same time, and kind of reciprocating our praise back to God. Amazing passage. That's Zephaniah. Oh, here we go. Here's those two that I've just read out to you. Sing, daughter Zion, shout aloud, Israel. Be glad, rejoice with all your heart. And then the Lord your God is with you, the mighty warrior who saves. He will take great delight in you in his love. He will no longer rebuke you, but will rejoice over you with singing. Zephaniah contains some of the most kind of intense images. I mean, he kind of goes to the extreme, doesn't he? He starts off by saying, basically, I'm going to undo everything that I did in Genesis chapter 1, which is all a bit extreme. And he carries on with that. But I think he does it to kind of show the passion of God, both in judgment or in trying to, you know, God's justice in the world, but also the love of God, and how God just longs to look after people. And so there's that justice in God's passion to rescue his broken world. And so that's why he judges it, not as a not just to bring punishment and say you're doing well or you're doing badly, but to try and kind of reconcile things and to bring that kind of rescue to a broken world and say this is not good enough. This is actually damaging the world and we need to stop this. But he couples with his love as well, to restore and to rebuild and to look after and protect the remnant of those people that serve him and worship him. And so you see God's passion in both the judgment and the love, which provides for the future hope of our world. And then lastly, in Habakkuk, that was written, I said, after King Josiah had died. And as I said before, the nation quickly went into spiral down into complete chaos. Um, and there was no real good kings after Josiah. And it just falls back into idolatry because it was really Josiah that was moved and tried to move the people, but their hearts really weren't in it. And Habakkuk is different because really what it is, it's Habakkuk addresses God directly. He's not really writing to the people as such, but he's actually lamenting. It's almost like a cry out to God about what he sees. It's almost like a prayer and a discussion between Habakkuk and God about what he sees. And so in chapters 1 and 2, there are two complaints that he makes. And the first complaint is this. He kind of goes, well, life in Judah, I look around me and it's absolutely intolerable. The law, the word of God is being neglected. I see violence, I see injustice, I see the leaders doing absolutely nothing. And what's more, God, I don't see you doing much either. Like, why don't you come down and sort this mess out? Because it's actually just a complete chaos here. And so he throws this accusation up at God and waits for God to respond. And God does respond. And God says this basically, he says, I'm aware of what's happening, I'm watching everything, and I'm going to bring the Babylonians to bring justice to Judah, and they're going to come in. So hold your horses here. I've seen it all, and I've already got it sorted, and the Babylonians are going to be my instruments to bring justice to Judah, because they're not going to get away with just behaving as they are. Then Habakkuk says to God, yeah, but they're even worse than Judah. How can you use somebody that's worse than us to bring justice onto us? How can you do that? You're supposed to be holy and good, and you're using such a corrupt nation that's really just a bully, and they're even worse. They sacrifice to other gods. They are violent. They kill people. They're just awful, and you're using them to to bring justice to us. That's not fair. And then God responds to that. He says, well, firstly, I'm going to bring the Babylonians down at some point, so they're not going to get away with it. And even though I do use corrupt nations, it doesn't mean I endorse what they do. I don't wait until I find a nation that's pure and holy, because I never found one, to bring my justice. I will use nations as I choose, in a sense, and they are my chosen instrument at this time. But I hold all nations accountable for their actions. Going back to what Nahum said as well, that God judges the nations around, and they have pride, and if they don't acknowledge God and so on, then I will be judging them as I am judging you. So I hold you all accountable in the same way. And that's his response to Habakkuk. And then God pronounces these 5 woes. He says, this, I see what's going on. I see in the first 2 woes, he says, I see all the unjust economic practices that are going on, that you're putting, you're lending money, but then bringing back with, putting tariffs on and all that kind of stuff that's going on, and trying to manipulate the markets and make the rich richer and the poor poorer. I see that you're using slave labor and you're abusing the poor because you have that power over them. I see that you're partying too much and getting drunk, he said, and your Friday nights are getting out of control, and that's not good either. You're supposed to be my holy people, and there's all this idolatry of money and of power, and you're worshiping other gods. And he says, like, the woes are the curses. He said, I'm pronouncing cursing upon you. Woes is the opposite to the blessing. So the Sermon on the Mount that starts with the Beatitude, blessed are those. A woe is an opposite to a blessing, if you like. So it's saying, cursed are you because of these things. I'm looking at you, and this is what I see you doing. This is don't think I'm not seeing what the people of Israel are really like and what the world is like down there or around you. This is what I see. And so Habakkuk then prays to God and he says, well, if you're seeing it, why don't you do something about it? Like, just come and sort this mess out because it's just got out of control. But then he remembers the Exodus and he brings into the his prayer the Exodus about how God brought down evil Egypt out of the sea, that God opened the sea, let the people of Israel go through, but then, and the plagues and everything else, and that God actually brought Egypt to its knees because he judged Egypt, found them to be wanting, just like the Babylonians will be or the Assyrians are, and God will do the same for every single evil nation. But he concludes with this word of hope. So it's just like many of the Psalms in so on. The Psalms of lament that go like, God, all my enemies are beating up on me. Like, why don't you do something about it? And I'm struggling. I'm this. I'm that. And then at the end of the psalm, it always comes up with this acclamation. And Habakkuk so, yeah, Habakkuk is exactly the same. He says, though the fig tree does not bud and there are no grapes on the vines, though the olive crop fails and the few fields produce no food, though there are no sheep in the sheepfold and no cattle in the stalls. So the world is a disaster area around me. Yet I will rejoice in the Lord. I will be joyful in God my Savior. The sovereign Lord is my strength. He makes my feet like the feet of a deer. He enables me to tread on the heights. So he's saying, even though I look at the world around me and it looks like a complete mess, I will still trust in God. I will still put my trust in that God knows what he's doing, that God is watching, that God will not allow this to continue forever, and that in God's timing and in God's way, God will sort this out, just as he did to the people of Israel who were in Egypt, and he rescued them and brought them out. So he will do it again and again and again and again. And I will put my trust in that, even though I don't really understand it all. And so he concludes really that God's love for the world is more than we have, and that God will not leave it to humanity to bring ruin and decay, but will judge and restore. And as he says in chapter 2, the second half of verse 4, he says, the righteous shall live by faith. We hang on to our faith in God, even though things don't look brilliant, don't look as though it's going in the right direction. Still, we will trust in God because God is on the throne and he is in control. And you see from those three prophets that span that kind of history between the end of the Northern Kingdom and the end of the Southern Kingdom in Israel, that they all share a similar kind of message, that God is watching, that the things that are happening around are not happening just by chance, that humanity has not got all the power and all the control over everything, but that God will actually is watching. He is seeing what's going on. He's looking into the hearts of people, and that God, when the right moment comes, God will suddenly go, that's it. I will bring my judgment. I will bring, but his judgment is always to bring about a purification, to turn people back towards himself. It's not about punishment. It's about reconciliation. It's about turning their hearts and making them realize what they're doing is going in the, well, as we would do on a Sunday, going towards the flesh instead of going towards the spirit, that they are walking away from God and what God would want them to do, and he wants to bring them back. And those that are walking towards him, the remnant, the righteous that do live by faith, then he will protect them, he will look after them, and he will honor that and see that as well as all the it won't get lost in the bigger picture of everything that's going on.